Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us. So excited to talk about queer joy and not queer tragedy for once. This is going to be great. I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the true custodians of the land on which I'm broadcasting from, which are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This was and always will be Aboriginal land, and no futuristic queer joy can really come without First Nations self-determination and solidarity. So like to extend my respect to any First Nations people watching. So I figure we launch off by introducing ourselves, talking a bit about our work. So my name is Nevo Zisin. I'm an author, an activist, and a public speaker, and I run workshops in schools and workplaces around trans identity. I've written a couple of books about gender. One is called Finding Nevo, and the other is The Pronoun Lowdown, both about different sort of gender things. Yeah. Adan, do you wanna
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Durr-e Haque. I'm broadcasting from the unceded lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'm a writer and poet, but I also have a podcast, Gay V Club, where I analyze representations of people of color in LGBT media.
Cool, that sounds so sweet. Cindy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, I'm Cindy. I'm coming from Wurundjeri land today. My pronouns are she, they. I am mostly a writer, but I also make theatre and film. I'm currently working on a gay little web series about queer people walking home at night and going on these little fantastical little adventures.
Cute. Oh, we love gay little web series. That sounds so fun. Jack, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jack Colwell. I'm broadcasting from Gadigal country today. I am a singer-songwriter. I released an album last year called Swan Dream that was produced with Sarah Blasco. What else do I do? I don't know. I guess that's kind of what I do. I write and perform music. And have always talked about my queer experience through my work. A little bit about me. Glad to be here today.
Thanks, Jack. And Nina, I know you've just joined us, so we're launching you right in. But just a little intro to yourself, whatever you would like to say.
Hi, my name's Nina Oyama. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm a stand-up comedian and comedy writer. And the reason I'm so sweaty is because I ran from a picnic. I grotesquely underestimated the time it would take to get from A to B. So yeah, that's why I'm very sweaty. In my defense, it was a queer date, so hopefully that wins me back some brownie points.
It absolutely does. I mean, I think queer joy is underestimating how long it takes.
I was like, I'll gay walk, it's fine, and then it was not fine. Spoiler alert. Anyway, I'm here now. Thank you for having me.
That's so wonderful. It's queer joy in practice. It really gets us on a good roll today. Thank you, Nina.
Well, on that note, I feel like that's a really good segue to the first discussion point for us, which is how do you think of queer joy in 2021 and what does it look or feel like? Does anyone want to jump in? Don't be too polite. Just go for it.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, queer joy to me, it really just boils down to love, of course. I feel in terms of like queer joy existing in media, that love is often expressed in romance, but I do think like non-romantic representations of queer love, like that's my bag. I really love that. I love looking at the way I love looking at like queer communities and the families that we build with each other, like logical families over biological families, and just the connections we make and how we protect each other. Like that's what queer joy is to me.
I agree with that. I would say I think for like a long time, I've like always identified as bisexual. Like I came out when I was 16 on formspring.me. I don't know if you guys remember. I know. Well, I came out as pansexual. I was like, I think everyone comes out as pan first, and then they're like, well, there's no P in the LGBTQIA plus alphabet. And so they're like, I'll just, anyway, sorry, that's a weird thing to say. I may have had some wines on the picnic, anyway, but I do think for a long time, like I isolated myself and I was kind of like very identified myself by whoever was my partner, which like for a long time were like heterosexual relationships. And I feel like embracing and having like the back of the queer community or having, like I guess like immersing myself in like a community that consisted of only queer people was something that like was really instrumental to me, at least as like a bi woman, which I hate being like bi. It's such a weird term, internalized biphobia. But I think like that part of acceptance was really instrumental into me, like being really able to own my queer identity and go forward with that.
Yeah, like knowing who you are and what you want.
Yeah.
I really love the term logical families. I don't know if I've ever actually heard that. I've definitely heard of like chosen families or like...
Yeah, chosen family and found family. There was a talk last year at the Mardi Gras, like with Mardi Gras festival that was on. And I remember like being at a panel where someone referred to them as logical families. And that was like my favorite thing ever. So I love saying that instead of like found families and things like that.
Yeah, it's so good. And it's such a good play on words as well. I really enjoyed that. I think, queer joy in 2021 is a particularly interesting subject, right? Because it's like the fullest extent of a lot of my queer joy is not available to me in the same formats as it has been. So I think like trying to find where that does exist in my daily life. And I've found it really interesting, like as a trans person in lockdown, what does that look like and what does that mean for me and how much of my trans identity can actually exist in its fullness because I'm not being misgendered every single day and that I'm not relative to other people in the same ways that I sort of am when I'm moving in public spaces. And I've been thinking about it a lot because I moved out to the bush during lockdown, and what does my gender actually mean and what is my gender when it isn't relative to the city landscape and also to other people, but rather to the river and the trees and the cockatoos who will just never misgender me. And there's a lot of like queer joy in that for me, is like just actually being able to exist in my fullness and to be witness to my own fullness and not have to be witnessed by anyone else. I think has been a really beautiful experience for me this year.
Yeah, that's such an interesting take in like as if queerness and like queer joy is instrumental to like the oppression that is faced by us or like exists in reaction to, and the fact that you were able like to take yourself out of that stuff and still exist and express like queer joy. I think that's really important.
Yeah, there's actually a really amazing article or essay that I reference all the time by my friend Fury, who has been part of National Young Writers in the past, but they wrote this article for Archer magazine called Extracting Queerness from a Narrative of Suffering. And it's all about like, what does it mean to be queer when the narrative isn't just surrounding like the ways that we've experienced depression or like built resilience, but like, what is our queerness when it is just joyful and euphoric and exciting? And I think that that's like something really interesting, especially in online spaces where people are trying to kind of pin themselves against each other of like who's experienced more oppression, which is obviously an important conversation to have with regard to recognized positionality, but like it doesn't define our queerness and it doesn't make us more queer or less queer, which speaks as well, Nina, to that internalized biphobia that you were talking about before.
Yeah, I mean, like, I definitely. Sorry, I realized there's a moderator being like, other people jump in. I'll be like 30 seconds. I'm sorry. But I do think, like, as someone that was like had recognized same-sex attraction in high school really early on and felt the oppression in like in a very homophobic environment, like I think that I have a lot of unconscious resentment to a lot of like bi women that get to come out on 25 because they read like the compulsory heterosexuality document from TikTok, and I go like, that's so nice that you got to do that. But then part of me was like, you didn't live through like knowing that everybody hated you because of your sexuality. And there is like a resentment that I definitely am trying to work through, but that like inherently exists in me because of my experience. And in a way, like I'm different from all the other bi people because I knew earlier, but it's not that. Like, I think I'm sorry, this is just me projecting my own trauma. Apologies. But anyway, everybody else, please jump in.
I think
sorry, Cindy, you go.
Okay, so I was just reminded of another panel that Nina was on yesterday that I watched, where she was like in a room full of POC, because we're not used to being the key voice. We just defer to each other all the time, and I feel like that happens in queer rooms as well. But anyway, just gonna jump in. Yeah, like I want to like circle back to what Nevo just said before as well, about how like it shouldn't be a matter of like, oh, who has experienced the most trauma as a queer person and in your journey of realizing who you are. But also I think like the way that like I personally come to see queer joy as well, is that like the joy and the grief are always kind of like intertwined with each other, in that like when we feel and express joy, it's like part of it comes from a place of having survived the grief and the trauma, and then when we are going through the trauma and the grief, what's kind of like, like what motivates our communities is that like joy in the future of, so it's like, I don't know, I've been thinking about this a little bit, about how like I don't know, so much of how I'm experiencing my queerness is how it all kind of exists at the same time, like parallel to each other.
No, exactly.
Yeah, great. I mean, I guess I mean, I've kind of been thinking about queer joy in like an art making kind of practice, and I guess to some like what Nina was saying, like definitely when I was in high school and I was coming to terms with being queer or gay or however I identified then, it was definitely like the queer narrative was really all about trauma, and everything that you kind of had access to was linked to like a story like about HIV or like prostitution, or like these very kind of sad sort of tales. They're things that I remember kind of getting access and to reading or viewing like shows and books around that sort of time, and I think like, well, I mean, I guess I released an album about my own queer trauma last year, but in kind of finding, so maybe I'm not really paying into the rule of what I'm about to say, but I think something that I do find kind of refreshing is that there is a whole new space of queer art that we can have in this day and age, which doesn't mean that these sorts of stories of trauma and tragedy don't exist, but there are stories that we can share and songs that are like a bit more lighthearted and are sharing more themes of connection and of logical family for, I guess, like the next generation to see those stories and feel comforted in. Whereas like the stories of queer joy that I experienced growing up were very few and far between, and the ones that did seem really positive were like incredibly like I guess like sexually loaded, or I don't know, they had like undercurrents of trauma and tension around them, and I would say that we're kind of moving to a place where it's not like those stories don't exist anymore, but there are narratives that can be told that are just pure joy, I guess, and I think that it allows I don't know, I feel that there's a comfort in knowing that, I guess. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm interested in, Jack, the way that you were speaking of like incorporating your queer trauma into your work, which I'm sure is something that we can all relate to at different points. And so I'm interested in like, how do we each individually express our queer joy through our work?
Yeah. Well, how do I experience my queer joy through my work? Yeah, I'm not really too sure, but I think that I guess like in the world that I have kind of built for my music, which does kind of relate to a little bit of world building. Like I guess I built like a mythical place for my album that came out last year to exist. It's called Swan Dream, and it's kind of like a repurposing of a mythic tale, I guess, that was actually a little bit based on this some elements from the Velvet Rage, I suppose, along with a Goya painting that I really loved. But I guess for me to kind of harness those elements that I found difficult and then express them through like a fantastical world that I kind of created, that like brought me a lot of joy to kind of repurpose those ideas and to kind of reframe them in a way that I felt really strong and kind of comfortable, I suppose. So while, you know, I would say that the narratives I was telling were not especially joyful on my part, quite personally, it brought me a lot of joy to kind of reframe them and to kind of be able to sit with them in a comfortable place and tell those stories from a place that didn't seem overwhelming and scary, but from a place that I felt like I had a control and an assertion over that narrative. And I guess for me, now that I've kind of done that, I feel like I could move forward into a place that is like a little bit more neutral for my storytelling in a sense, or for the joy that I might share and experience next in my work.
So we're expecting a Carly Rae type pop album from Jack Colwell.
Absolutely.
That's just like all bops,
Please.
no sadness.
No sadness. All three, all
pure,
songs only go for 15 seconds. So that's
all
perfect.
disco, baby.
Yeah, that's right. Cindy, what about you?
I love love and romance, and not necessarily in the romantic love sense of love and romance. I don't know. I feel like when I write about queer joy, it's always like, it's like a slow motion montage, like Technicolor, like queers cruising down the road. Everyone's like laughing and dancing. Yeah, I'm very like corny that way. That's what I love. And a lot of, I don't know, I feel like I don't necessarily strive to be queer in my work, if that makes sense. Like, I am queer and I'm making work, and obviously if it's in some way based around my life and my communities, then that kind of just comes out. And I don't know, like, I love writing love letter poems to my queer friends and putting them into the stories, almost in like kind of like as like a diary to kind of like look back on, and also like for like my teenage self to be like, hey, this is what you get to live now. Isn't that cool? Yeah.
Beautiful.
With my work recently has actually been pretty dark. So, it's queer joy in the fact that it gives me a they them lesbian joy to create. But yeah, like Cindy said, I don't really think of my work, like I don't really try to be queer in my work, but it seeps in anyway. Recently, I've actually tried more, like trying to incorporate more queer subtext into my work than like having anything like overtly explicit, because I think it's like I think it's a lost art form that's underrated, and that's another conversation. In terms of Gay V Club, like I find queer joy in just like finding all these pieces of media and being able to like look at them and examine them and being like, hey, look at this is so great. Or like, even if it's not necessarily like media that's full of joy, it's just something like, I'm just really glad that it exists, and I love I love being able to show people that these things exist.
Do you have a favorite piece that you've looked at from Gay V Club?
Oh, everyone that knows me knows that my number one favorite film is The Handmaiden. And yeah. But we've got lots of stuff there.
I think for me, queer joy is, in terms of art, like I feel like because the television industry, which is what like I operate in mostly, is such a like cishet white male kind of dominated industry. And so when you're in a writer's room or when you're writing a show, if you do have a queer character that is like core to the story, it immediately gets pinned as a queer story. Like, I remember being in a writer's room and like they were like, I was hired to make a story on like 3 episodes that were later on in the series, and like the first thing they brought up, it was about like, oh god, I don't want to say it because I feel like everyone's gonna be like, oh, we've seen the Variety article for that because it will come out soon. But like essentially it was about like 10 women stranded in a place. No, okay, I'll keep going. 10, and it was like the first thing I noticed, I was like, none of these people are queer, and like not even necessarily from a representational perspective, but I kind of came in because when you're in a writer's room, you have to like accommodate everyone, and I was like, just from a statistical perspective, like there should be a queer narrative or at least a queer character in these like 10 people. And so I think like because I spend so much of my time like fighting for representation, that I think like something that I've noticed in all of my projects recently is that like I just embrace that moniker and been like, yeah, fuck it, it is a queer story, but like guess what, it needs to be heard. Sorry that I just said a swear. Oh my god. I have run out of water and I've moved on to whatever this drink is.
I think you're allowed to swear, Nina. I think it's fine.
Okay, good. But I think there is something in just being like,
well, there we go.
Yeah, just being like, screw it, like this is who I am. This is the kind of art that I want to make. And not only that, is like there is a huge market for it. Like I think part of being like a writer that works in this very like white, like I'm the youngest person in every writer's room I've ever been since I was 19, and now I'm 28, and everyone is like a 40-year-old person that's like in a heterosexual marriage with children. And it is, and also a lot of queer people that run in these circles have like been, I guess, like conditioned to think that the market is mostly heterosexual, and so discourage a lot of straight characters. I think like anyone over 45 that works in this industry that is even queer is very much like, no, like we don't want this to be a queer story. And so I think like for me, Queer Joy is like leaning into that and trying to convince those people that like these stories are worth telling because it's 2021, motherfucker. No, sorry. But like, you know, I think like is taking that ownership and like selling it to people, and it doesn't always work. Like that's the worst part. I like pitched this show about like this 30-year-old lesbian, and this executive was like, we love it. We love it. You know what I'm thinking? Ronan. And I was like, what is Ronan? He goes, Ronan Keating, main character. And I was like, are you serious? Like, I just pitched you a show about a lesbian relationship, and that's the entire like predication of this woman's trauma and like the way that her arc goes. And he goes, Ronan Keating. And I think like, yeah, it's so annoying to have to fight up against it. But like recently I pitched another queer arc on a different writer's room that I was working on, and they embraced it wholeheartedly despite the showrunners and the creators being cis men. And so it like, to me, I guess like, and maybe it's kind of like we have to push queer joy into the narrative because at least in the television industry, it's so rare that we get to like see it from the perspective of like a person that is ingrained in the community and like exists in this sphere without being like the one person. Like I think that's like for me the priority is like stopping queerness from being part of a minority identity and like really just pushing it into acceptance. I feel like, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I have like quite a lot of different strands of how queer joy exists in my work, and I would say that it's like pervasive. It's definitely a motif of all of the work that I do. But Cindy, I really resonate with what you were talking about of just like loving love and being corny about it. I'm just like have such a lesbian heart, and I'm a marriage celebrant, and a big reason why I became a marriage celebrant was because I just really wanted to surround myself with queer love. And I used to be very like anti-marriage and like really critical of like all these institutions, and I still think that's like really important. But it's been so beautiful just meeting couples who are queer who really fucking love each other and want to be together forever and just like want to have these like weird polyamorous kinky weddings, and I get to officiate that for them and like not misgender them, and it's just really joyful. And I feel like there is a lot of queer joy in the work that I do at the moment. And today I actually this morning ran a workshop for parents and families of trans and gender diverse young people who are like writing their stories. And one of the mums said to me that she had read my book in her book club like a month before her kid ended up coming out. And it just happened by chance, and that she was just like so grateful that she already had some kind of foundational knowledge when they came out. that she was then able to pass on to other families and stuff like that. And I just like, I get those messages quite a lot, and it's just like, this is the celebration that I'm here for. Like, this is what I am trying to do, is like showing people how every single day I wake up and I thank my fucking lucky stars that I'm trans and that I get to live this like big queer trans life. Like, there is no part of me anymore that wishes things were different. Like, I am so happy. I feel like trans people are sacred, and we offer so many alternatives of what the world can look like when we expand past these restrictive colonial ideas about gender. And I think that's really clear in like everything that I do and what I always want to speak to. And it feels so nice to be more and more asked to be on panels to actually talk about the positives and not just have to steep in the trauma or the sad stuff, because, you know, I think that stuff is really important. But yeah, I feel really grateful to be able to explore the other parts, because that's the bigger part of my life. Like, the sad stuff comes from lockdown and capitalism and, you know, so many bigger systems, not like being queer. It's the least of my problems.
There's like a mini series to be made here, like 5-minute episodes of a queer trans marriage celebrant, and every episode is a different marriage. Let's just get off the call. Let's just start this room now.
Yeah, let's pitch it.
Pitch meeting.
Call Screen Australia. Like, let me fucking help you. Sorry, oh god, swearing in.
Yeah, it would be so cute. I have a couple that are getting married soon as a surprise at their engagement party, and we might all be wearing like matching mushroom shirts, which I'm very excited about.
I think it would be incredible to make like a queer anthology series. I think that would be groundbreaking. Unfortunately groundbreaking, but like in a way that would hopefully contribute to positive discourse.
Yeah, what do you think are like tropes or habits that hold queer joy back, and why? Nina, I feel like you were speaking to that quite a lot about like executives and writers' rooms and the kind of dominance of heteronormativity. But I wonder, like, for other people as well in your work, how do you feel like that stuff is held back, or even within your life, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of to something Cindy was saying before about how Cindy was saying that you make work, Cindy, but your work isn't always like consumed with your queerness in some ways. Like, sometimes it is when you choose it to be, and sometimes you're just making work. But I guess you know, I kind of feel similarly some way in like music, that, you know, it's known that I have a profile as like a queer singer-songwriter, but not all of my work is kind of concerned with being queer. But sometimes I feel like there's like an expectation that I'm needed to bring my queer tragedy to the table in order to kind of compete with other people. And I kind of feel like as a minority, like, that's what is expected to me, of me, and kind of in order for me to hold space at like a table in a way. But whether I like wonder if I was to just write a song about, I don't know, like I guess it could kind of be to do with the point of time that we're at, that maybe we're not kind of here yet culturally, but like for me to write a song despite liking someone else, like that would be viewed as other people as being like a queer love song, or it's still kind of viewed through this lens, when, you know, I'm not always writing that song that way. Like, for me, it's just like I'm writing a love song or something, and it's like, why can't that song be viewed just without the queer lens all the time? Does that kind of make sense in a way? Yeah. I actually kind of forgot the initial question halfway while I was answering, but I feel like that can be like a little bit tricky sometimes, because I feel like all of your work is kind of expected to be brought to the table with a queer lens. And sometimes I like, yeah, if I'm sharing something joyful, like a love song or whatever, like I don't always need to have something else attached to it. Like, it could just be like a song that makes me feel good or whatever. I don't always have to view it through this other way.
Yeah, like you never hear someone be like, hey, listen to this really great like heterosexual music album that just dropped.
Totally.
I know, it's always like, listen to
album of the year. Like, what? Oh my god! Like,
it's always like, listen to this Troye Sivan song about bottoming.
Yeah, I know, yeah, totally. Yeah. Or like, it could just be like a song about partying and it's not like, well, I mean, I feel like straight partying might be like a little bit boring anyway. But they're not like, I don't know, it's just it is kind of like that, I guess. Yeah. Anyway, would anyone else like to go?
In terms of like tropes and habits that inhibit queer joy, I guess like as you were saying, Nevo, about how there's this assumption that the thing that's sad about you is the fact that you're queer, when actually like it's all these different factors. It's again like that portrayal of being LGBT is a sadness in itself, and this is of course like historically propagated by the fact that so many queer stories were told by people who weren't queer at all at the time, and so it comes to this point, and it's of course they want us to suffer, blah 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 blah, Hays Code, but I think the greatest queer joy obviously comes when we're able to tell our own stories, and because there's so much more authenticity, and it's just imbued with love inherently. Like even if the story isn't particularly joyful, that this person that's making this like loves what they're doing and loves their community, and that's what we need to see more of.
Yeah,
doing our own stories is really important.
I think.
I was going to defer to Cindy.
Okay. What I was going to say, about us getting to write our own stories is that, like, I have this huge, like, pet peeve of. I mean, it's not just a personal pet peeve at this stage because there's whole websites dedicated to this, but can people stop killing the queer characters in movies and shows, please? And can some of the couples end up together sometimes instead of being in different continents, and one of them is
looking at each other longingly?
Yeah, in a heterosexual marriage now. Yeah. That was kind of it, really. That's just what I thought of as soon as you said, like, what tropes hinder queer joy is when they kill us. That's kind of it.
I will say my new favorite expression of queer joy is like texting all my friends when the newest L word comes out and being like, this show is the worst thing I've ever seen. And every character is bad and the choices they make are terrible. But I think it is hard because I feel like, I don't know, I think it's this weird thing of like the way that I think I'm like obsessed with identity because I'm like a little egomaniac Leo. But I think it's this thing of like where you have an identity that is a thing that you like in terms of, because we live in this day of age of like Instagram and branding and like the way we have to present ourselves versus the way that we're consumed versus the way that we actually are. I feel like in some ways, like we have to establish ourselves as queer and make that like the way we are perceived in order to like stand out or like be successful. And I think like I yearn for the day that we don't have to do that anymore. It's like a very interesting thing where it's like we want to be different, but we want to like have acceptance, but we don't want like homogeneity. Like it's this like very, very fine line. I'm just obsessed with branding. I think like everything that I do comes down to branding, which is grotesque, but also like understand that that's the nature of like the capitalistic society that I don't know if you've listened to like You're Wrong About, where you're like, it's capitalism all along. But I meant like, I completely hear that idea of like the way that queer characters were always killed off or they never ended up happy. But like, I recently had to fight in a writer's room for a queer character whose partner gets killed off, and like I did not want the partner to die, but like the overwhelming response and my like little win was like that person was able to be queer at all. And I just feel like it's an uphill battle sometimes in terms of that, but I think the response to that is creating art for myself by myself, because I was not the creator of said show, where that like love and that triumph can exist without like the executive notes, which are just a bummer. Which are like Ronan Keating. God, I hate that guy so much. He was like, he was like, what have you worked on? I was like, Tonightly, and he was like, that's a fucking shit show. That's why I was fucking cancelled. I was like, great, really excited to pitch to you. You seem great. Anyway, sorry.
Life is a roller coaster, as Ronan Keating would say.
I don't know what you're referring to, but I assume it's a Westlife song.
It's actually one of his solo songs, but anyway, that's right.
Oh boy, I'm sorry, I'm not like well versed in the discography of like Ronan Keating.
I just lived through that time.
I will say, like, for me personally, queer joy exists outside of my art, and maybe that's like controversial to say, but I feel like because so much of like the time that I spend creating is like having these freaking battles with the worst white straight cis men, and then like coming home and like living in my share house that I found on Queer Housemates of the Inner West or whatever Facebook group I was on. But it's just like we then get to live in like our communal space where we like, you know, put on fun dance tracks and get drunk and we dance till 3 a.m. and we like try and recreate the vibes of the club, which I would never normally say because it sounds so cringe. But I also do think like in lockdown, we want to go to the club and like the best thing we can do is just get loaded and like dance to Kylie Minogue in the backyard. But it's just like reappropriating our own space to make it the place that we want as almost like for me personally, like a safe haven from like the way that we have to fight for basic human rights in our art. But I also do think I create in a like particularly patriarchal space, especially in Australia, that is like such a horrible like supremacy of all the bad stuff.
I want to pick up on this point about like queer joy existing outside of our work and outside of our art, because I think that there has been so much queer joy that has come from me in like grappling with and moving through my internalized capitalism and that like grind culture around creating and being an artist and whatever. And when I decided that actually my life's purpose is not to write a million books or be the best kind of artist, but is actually to love and be loved by my friends and have the most beautiful experiences with them, I feel like I've been so liberated that I'm like, I actually just want to make enough money to be able to like hang out with my friends or like pay for them to go to festivals so they can enjoy that, or you know what I mean? Like and obviously there's like a lot of privilege in unlearning capitalism and being able to take time off. But I feel like I've become so much more of a three-dimensional person. Even like with regard to branding, Nina, I think about that a lot in like my Instagram and how much things were always about like trans stuff and queer stuff. And now since I started like having more hobbies and like my followers now know that I like really, really love mushrooms and fungi and like I'm a big mycology nerd.
Oh my god, I love mushrooms too. Let's take mushrooms together.
Yes, I have a queer mushroom group I can add you to. I love all mushrooms though, I don't discriminate. Also,
let's also eat, you know, bought mushrooms, like non-magical mushrooms.
I love
just all mushrooms.
And also like that I love tiny things and like fairies and little fairy gardens. And now instead of people asking me like, how do I deal with a family member coming out, or like what's in this situation, people send me like mushroom themed clothing or like little like tiny videos, and it just like makes me feel so much more joyful and like, and also like a three-dimensional person, because it's like I'm not just trans or queer, like I'm also really into a lot of different like weird and wacky things.
In terms of branding, I do feel like, yeah, I'll put everything in my bio. I'll put all the ways that I'm marginalized in my bio. But
wait,
that's mostly just because
sorry to interrupt, but the Keanu Reeves hoodie, we all need to know.
I was gonna say that.
Yes, thank you.
Drop the link.
Yes, I'm also marginalized just as the only one that like truly understands Keanu Reeves. But yeah, in terms of branding and like
okay, I would argue I also understand Keanu.
I can pull out all my Blu-rays right
now.
I
like Keanu.
But
Just because I don't own the Blu-rays doesn't mean I don't.
Lesbian icon.
He is, right? I always saw him as like, yeah, as that, but beyond that, I think because I'm Eurasian, and for some reason, every time I see a Eurasian person represented in pop culture, I'm like, that's me. But yeah, fuck yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to point it out because
no. In terms of that, like, I do think it's important, like, for me, to kind of preface everything that I do with who I am, like with how I identify, mostly just like because I think it's really important for people to know where I'm coming from whenever I'm critiquing something or whenever I'm creating something. And also, like, it helps my people find me, basically, and for my people to know what it is, because, like, that's who I'm making this art for.
Totally. And I think if that just gets people in the door, then you can say whatever you want. You know what I mean? If it's like someone will connect with your work because of the ways that you're marginalized or because of your identity, and then you can like bring them on all of these other journeys as well, I think is like actually such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's almost the responsibility of representation, which I think is really interesting. Is like, what's your responsibility as an artist to be visible as a queer person? And beyond that, I guess tying it back to this conversation, what's your responsibility as an artist to be representing queer joy, instead of, you know, like signposting the oppression, which I also think like is integral to our identity, but like beyond that, to represent the happiness and I guess like the freedom felt within that community. This is maybe like too personal to put on the pod. It's not a podcast, it's a panel. The pan.
It does
but
live on YouTube after, Nina.
I
want to know.
Oh, it's both? Okay, sick.
Yeah.
But I think like I went through a very traumatic situation at the beginning of lockdown, and I spun out very publicly, which I somewhat regret. But at some point during that public spin out, somebody told me, they were like, who was also queer, was like, you need to represent like yourself experiencing life beyond this traumatic place that you're in, and really like show that you're able to live and thrive beyond this like horrible thing that you went through. And I almost think that's like the responsibility of us as queer artists to like be like, not be like it gets better, because I do think that's like a campaign that was hijacked by like, I don't know, whatever awful corporation, but to be like, it's fun, like life is good. Is that an odd thing to say? Sorry.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And I think going on from that as well, I think, like on top of representation, like what we can do as artists is, because we have this very like public platform that we're always putting our work onto, to like funnel that energy into our communities as well, because I feel like so much of like queer joy off the page and screen is having that community where you don't, you know, like the trauma and grief is almost expected of you. So not expected of you, but expected as a part of your history. So it's not, you don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to contextualize like all of your suffering. You get to kind of just be in this community and care for each other and like share joy with each other. And yeah, I feel like really like resonate with not necessarily focusing on queer joy in my work, but making it like a priority in life and in communities. Like here in NAM, there is a like mutual aid network that I'm working with called Food Angels that delivers meals to queer folks. It's run by queer folks, so we have cooks and drivers, and they have bases sort of like across the north and west, and every week, you know, anyone can sign up to receive meals when you're having a hard time, and it's just like really nice to be able to kind of be held in that community, and at any point, you know, you can drop out and become a recipient, or if you have been a recipient, you can become a cook or a driver. It's just that kind of like reciprocity and care that I feel like is a big part of I don't know, like why I feel more queer joy outside of me just kind of sitting at my computer trying to make work.
Yeah.
You can also help out by organizing all the MDMA for all the queer people at your picnic. Sorry, I don't know why I said that. I thought it would be funny, and then I was immediately like, that's bad. I'm not on MDMA right now. I just thought I'd put that out there. But just, I will put myself on mute.
I think they both sound like wonderful things to do. They're both giving in their own ways. They're both great. I don't know. I feel like I feel like I'm probably just very simple. I just like music and I play music, and that's just kind of what I do. I don't. Yeah, that's just about it. I love to play classical piano and guitar, and yeah, that's just what I have to say. I don't know. I feel a bit boring in that regard, but yeah, that's what I do.
I also wanted to say that like something that I think has really allowed me to sit and digest in my queer joy, as well as like a lot of like Adrienne Marie Brown's approaches to pleasure activism, and like really also just like enjoying your life, you know? And I think that I used to really approach activism and oppression from a place of like guilt and shame over my own privileges or my lack of understanding or ignorance. And I think now I approach it from a place of really loving my life and wanting everyone to really love their lives and have access to that joy and that like luxury. Yeah, I just wanted to chuck that in.
Yeah, I feel like if we as queer folk are feeling joy, then that's queer joy. Like that's kind of it.
I also think like queer joy is inherently political, and by experiencing joy, we're rebelling against the system. So experience all the joy that you possibly can, because ACAB.
Is there like
I can't wait for restrictions to end. Go back to experiencing queer joy. That's all I'm waiting for. Like I guess like, you know, Nina, you're obviously going on picnics, and I'm so jealous because I don't have any gays in my area. Like where are
they? Sorry, for some reason in my brain, like my sketch comedy brain was like, local gays in your area.
Yeah, no, that's what I meant. Like,
you just haven't been clicking on enough stuff.
Like here are some lesbians in your LGA.
Where are you? You're on Gadigal land. Are we close?
No, Gadigal land is huge.
That is true. But on the off chance, is it? I'll message you afterwards. We'll tee something up. If any gays want to go on a picnic with me, I'm in Marrickville. Just putting that out there.
There we go. Yeah, just putting it out there.
Jack, we have to go on a picnic. What are we doing?
We're in the same picnic destination.
And next time I'm on Wurundjeri land, I will be hitting you up for mushrooms.
Yeah. I saw that
because it's a political act, not because I like taking drugs. Out of disrespect for the white supremacist patriarchy, I will be
responsibility to your queer joy. I get it.
Oh yeah.
I get it. Yeah.
So that we've got a few minutes left. I thought it might be good if we just said like something that we're like listening to or reading, or something that might be bringing us some kind of queer joy at this current time. I guess if there's anything as a way to kind of wrap it up. I'm always like looking for new things to share with my book club that has only met once, but I'm writing them down for future events. So yeah, what's bringing us joy? What's bringing us joy?
I'll jump in. I'm reading a book at the moment called Raising Them by Dr. Kyle Myers, who's a sociologist in gender, and it's all about gender creative parenting and how they raise their kid without assigning them a gender and what like that gender expansiveness looked like. And that's really, really cute, and I love it. And the other thing bringing me queer joy is that I have a really, really big crush at the moment, and I'm going to see her right after this.
Amazing.
What's bringing me queer joy is, look, I have like an unwavering obsession with Julian Baker. I think it's because she sings about being sad and gay, and I'm like, same. But just, I don't know. I think like she is someone who's gone through the wars in terms of like addiction and like coming to terms with her Christian identity in relation to her queer identity. And currently I feel like she's out the other side, and she's giving a lot of interviews and like really reasserting, like redefining herself as a joyful person, as opposed to, because she makes such sad music, much like Jack Colwell actually. But I think it's like embracing the antithesis of, and yeah, embracing like the way that joy can come from like sadness and depression, like objectively like not relevant to queerness, I think is something really beautiful. And the fact that like an artist that creates sad music can be really joyful was revelatory to me, because I was like, oh, she's probably such an emo. No, she's really fun. And so is Jack Colwell. And so I just thought I'd put that out there.
Like kind of off what Nina just said, like even though something's not necessarily joyful, it brings you joy. Like I love crying. That brings me joy. And obviously I only just read On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. So that has made me like so happy, even though it made me cry like every 10 pages. I just, yeah, it gave me joy just to be moved. And on a more positive commercial note, of course, I've been listening to Montero by Lil Nas X, and that's been the best. Even like listening to it with my straight brother is great, and just like hearing the way that like even he is made happy by it is excellent.
The MTV Video Awards performance of that is like, it's so good. It is. I don't know if this is a weird. Sorry, I feel like Cindy's gonna go next, but just really 30 seconds. Is that like, where else can you see an homage to like the Shawshank Redemption and Lady Gaga's Telephone? Only a queer man, like only a queer person could like encapsulate that and like make a total banger of a song. It's so good.
Cindy.
On the queer love train, I feel like this has become a theme for me today. There's a poet I love called Chen Chen, who is Chinese American, and he can make poems about shitting the bed sound romantic. He actually has a poem about pooping the bed, and it's a love poem, and it's great. And yeah, like when I was thinking about like writers who really like center queer joy, like he was the one that really came to mind. All his stuff's online. You should go and read.
Lovely. My queer joy is I've been really into this song by the Goon Sax that actually came out a few years ago now, but I feel like I'm always really like late to find out about things because I spend my life listening to this one Durr-e album on repeat like nearly every day. And the Goon Sax song is called Boyfriend, and I think it came out like 3 or 4 years ago. It's like a really cute love song, but I'm just hearing about it now. And I love this song, and I listen to it a lot when I'm not listening to that other Durr-e album. So yeah, it's good. That's what's bringing me some joy. And Durr-e, of course, brings me joy every day of the year, 365 or 366 days if we're in a leap year. So there we go. Yeah, I guess that's my final word.
I actually love that. Sorry to jump in again, but I think like it's really incredible to me. Like, oh my god, Jack's like this bitch. Yeah. But like the way that like, so I've been listening to a lot of Boy Genius and Phoebe Bridgers and Lucy Dacus and Julian Baker, obviously. And I think like going back into the history of the music they've created. So I've become obsessed with Brandi Carlile. I'm reading her biography right now, her autobiography, and listening to like The Joke and like all of her albums, and just like my mind is blown. But then also like delving back further into like queer history and like the band Placebo, which is like majorly, they're incredible. And they like, I love Car Seat Headrest, which is definitely like a soft boy, straight boy band. And like the way that Placebo has informed that, like I guess like learning the history of queer music has actually influenced a lot of like modern day, like heteronormative music, I think has been a really interesting study for me, but also makes me feel less bad for enjoying Car Seat Headrest.
Yeah, queer music's always led the way.
All right, I think on that note, we're gonna end our beautiful panel on queer joy. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to everyone for sharing your queer joy with us.
Thanks for sharing, Meg. Thanks so much to meet everyone. So lovely.
Hit me up for a picnic if you're in Marrickville.
Yeah, I'll see you in Marrickville in like 30 minutes. All right.
Play us out.